Okay, and then a few graduate students as well, or faculty? Okay, okay. All in engineering, or do we have some visitors to our strange land? A visitor. Where are you from? What department?
Computing, but I'm an anthropologist.
All right, welcome, welcome. You're very brave to venture over to surround yourself. Ethnographic study, I'm sure. Yes, so my name is Jessica Kaminsky. I do, as of yesterday, have a PhD in civil engineering, specifically looking at engineering and developing communities. My own career began in a standard civil engineering undergraduate program, went into the professional arena, and now has fully transitioned into focusing my work on humanitarian engineering. So I'm going to talk about that somewhat. I'm also going to talk about, a little more generally, different pathways that friends of mine, colleagues of mine have taken to work in humanitarian engineering. And that's where I'm going to ask help from Jeff Walters here. He has experience co-founding an excellent potable water nonprofit. So he'll talk about that experience.
Told you she was going to.
I told him about this yesterday, that he was expected to present, so I'm sure it'll be excellent. Generally, the agenda, talking about what you need to know about the sector to get yourself informed, the skills you need to actually get a job in the arena, different ways you can actually enter and work in development. And then finally, I'm hoping we can do sort of an interactive activity towards the end where everyone can sort of take a concrete step towards making that dream or whatever dream you yourself hold a reality. So first of all, in terms of getting informed, if anyone is working or interested in working in humanitarian engineering, I hope you recognize this graphic. So this graphic represents the Millennium Development Goals, which have been in place starting in approximately the year 2000. They weren't quite ready to go, of course, they were a little late. But in the past 13 years, they've set out targets for what the development community hopes to achieve before the year 2015. Of course, that's right around the corner. Some of these targets we will achieve, for example, providing drinking water to more people. We're on track there. Not everyone in the world, but a good chunk. Others we are not on track, for example, like sanitation. We are not on track to meet that goals for a variety of reasons. But if you step through these, although none of them, except possibly Goal 7, ensure environmental sustainability, talk specifically about engineering, every one of them has a role for engineers. Certainly I come from civil engineering, the perspective of infrastructure, heavy civil infrastructure, water, sanitation, transportation, energy. But there's a lot more to it than that. Goal 5, improving maternal health, for example, has gotten a big boost lately from a gadget that some engineers have come up that use car batteries to power an incubator that can keep premature babies warm and keep them alive longer. There's a lot of things we can do in all of these areas. Now, of course, we're almost to 2015. These goals are about to expire, if you will, and there's a big debate in the community right now about what should replace them. Probably what it's going to be is something called the Sustainable Development Goals instead of the Millennium Development Goals, but we still don't quite know what those will look like. Probably something similar, pretty concrete targets, measurable things. That's where the field is going, not just doing things, but doing it and then evaluating it to see what impact we're having. So my own path to get here began at Rice University. That's where I took a bachelor's degree in civil engineering, quite traditional. But while I was there, I heard actually a lecture from a professor at the University of Colorado Boulder, Bernard Amadei. I'm sure many of you know his name. He founded Engineers Without Borders. So back when I heard, Jeff's advisor for that matter, back when I heard him speak, Engineers Without Borders had a chapter at CU Boulder, and that was it. Rice followed shortly thereafter. Now it has over 10,000 members. There's a lot of interest, and all of you, I think some of the excitement in this room sort of stems from that movement. Engineers becoming more aware, wanting to get involved with their community, recognizing we're building technology for people. That's what engineers do. We use science and knowledge to serve the human population, even perhaps the non-human population in terms of animals in the natural environment, making that a bit more exciting and not just equations, right? So although I was aware of this, I did take a traditional consulting job. I went to work for CH2M Hill, which is actually headquartered right down the road in Denver. It's one of the world's largest engineering firms. It's a terrific place to work. I was there for 6 years. I worked for them in Alabama, in Chicago, and then eventually overseas in Sydney, Australia. And so I had some pretty terrific experiences with that. And I put a few of the projects that I was able to participate on as an engineer think you'll find that you pretty quickly you end up in management, in logistics, and trying to get things done more than running calculations, which can be a big transition for people. But people who, like yourselves, who are interested in that sort of thing and making technology work for people have a huge leg up. So some of the work I did there, I was involved in providing temporary housing after Hurricane Katrina, Wilma hit the Gulf Coast. So that involved a lot of time, some south of New Orleans. You can imagine how bad that situation was. And to tell you how quickly things can change when you're doing that sort of aid work, aid different than development, aid after disasters, development, every day trying to improve things. I was on the ground in Louisiana for no more than a week and a half trying to do assessments, get out the FEMA trailers that eventually ended up being so controversial when I was transferred to Mississippi to actually manage the deployment for that entire state, because after a week and a half on the ground, you're the expert. So what does this require? Flexibility, thinking outside the box, talking to a heck of a lot of people from a heck of a lot of backgrounds. That this is what we need to do to be good, effective engineers, to really serve the populations we're trying to serve. Other work I was involved in Chicago, we were going after the 2016 Olympics. Sadly, we lost out to Rio, although perhaps not sadly, since the Olympics have never actually been held in South America before, which is pretty ridiculous. But that was a really fun project. The Olympic Games are supposed to be green. They're supposed to be sustainable. And so we spent a lot of time talking about redeveloping parts of Chicago, improving the public transportation systems there, figuring out ways we can improve the city through the Olympic Games. What else did I do? In Sydney, I spent a lot of time working on a project looking at greenhouse gas emissions from wastewater treatment plants. So in Australia, nobody doubts climate change and has for some time. They're already getting refugees from surrounding islands that are being submerged in the oceans. So they take it quite seriously. And one of the things they do, they have utilities who have decided that they are going to maintain a baseline emission. They said, okay, as of 2010, that's as much emissions as we're ever going to emit, even if populations increase, even if regulatory standards change, so that we have to, for example, fully disinfect wastewater streams, which is really energy intensive. So pretty exciting work going on there. So again, with these projects, when you're on the cutting edge of technology change, which is my interest when infrastructure changes, you don't have a textbook answer. You don't know how these things are going to progress. And so you have to talk to people. You have to negotiate. You have to be aware that it's a political process with everybody involved in the room. Absolutely has to be founded on technology, on all the fundamentals that all of you are getting here. But you also need what you could call the software side of engineering, not meaning computers, but meaning knowledge, meaning institutions, meaning politics, all the rest of engineering. And then for some reason I decided to put, I'm not sure why I did this, the title when I decided to quit my job. For some reason they decided to put somebody 6 years out of school in charge of coordinating business development and technology for conveyance technologies, tunnels, pipelines, all that sort of thing for all of C.H. Hill International, which is everything other than the US and Canada. They decided that was the same thing for some reason. That was a pretty terrific opportunity. But when I had the chance to come back to CU, turn my career to focus on humanitarian engineering full-time instead of just as a volunteer, I knew it was something I had to do. So part of the reason I made that decision was first a current that ran through all of those projects, this focus on sustainability, on change, on making the world a better place, which is what I was interested in. I was also involved with Engineers Without Borders. So I was in Chicago for about 5 years working for C.H. Hill, and they were extremely supportive of the work I was doing on a volunteer basis with Engineers Without Borders. So I helped to found the professional chapter there and expanded the chapter from a few people sitting around a table to 100 active professional engineers working on projects across the globe, doing fundraising for that, coordinating it, work that perhaps many of you are doing on similar projects here. And that was a real growth experience for me. You can imagine yourself 1 or 2 years down the road suddenly in charge of 100 professional engineers, most of whom are 30, 40, 50 years older than you. It was a terrific experience. But again, we were talking about sustainability. We're talking about people. And that was my interest. And so I came back to the University of Colorado at Boulder to join the Mortensen Center of Engineering for Developing Communities so I could really focus on that. My next step is University of Washington, where I'll continue my research. And let me tell you what that is. So this graphic represents the world's population. Each of these little dots, probably from where you're sitting, is a graphic of a household that represents 1 million households. About 6 people in the house, 7 million people in the world. The problem that I'm particularly interested in, or have been for my dissertation, is that at least 2.5 billion of them don't have access to sanitation. Probably not all of you are environmental engineers, and so if you're uncomfortable with talking about poop, I apologize, but if you want to work in humanitarian engineering, you better get comfortable with it, because it's a big part of the sector. So just say it to yourself 10 times a day, get used to going to a bar and talking about it, trust me, it's something you need to do. So this number is actually pretty darn conservative. Some of the more recent estimates that have been coming out expand that by at least 1 billion, maybe more. So we're talking pretty serious numbers. Why are those numbers going up? Well, for example, the definition of the green part here, improved sanitation, includes people who are connected to sewers that are not connected to treatment plants. So if you add that requirement, this line comes down to about here. You get 1 billion more people. Similarly, if you're looking at just the rural half of the world, most of those people are not served by sewers. They're served by on-site technologies, latrines, septic tanks. Here in the United States serve 30% of households. This is a lot of people. And we have terrible metrics for what happens post-construction. So we are measuring what's getting built. When we say we're improving sanitation, we're not measuring what's being used. And anecdotally, those numbers are terrible. You could consider this like an engineer's to-do. We need to build these systems, we're done. But really, if you start looking at the reported failure rates from practitioners, even from some of the engineering literature right now, we have at least 40 to 50% failure rates. So hundreds of millions of systems, billions of people, maybe briefly had access to sanitation, don't anymore. So what's causing this? You've probably seen some of these when we're talking about sustainability. Of course, systems have to work. Technically, that's a prerequisite. They have to be environmentally sustainable, economically sustainable, and socially sustainable. But unfortunately, we don't really know what that social sustainability piece means. We might say that systems fail for social reasons, but what does that actually mean for the designs that we're coming up with, the way we're building our infrastructure? So that's my primary interest as an academic. That's been my dissertation work and will continue moving forward. So perhaps somebody in the room again is thinking, when we're talking about pit latrines, how could that break? There are no moving parts. This is a picture of a broken pit latrine. You can see the pit is open here, the slab is cracked. So even though there are no moving parts, it can be broken. This does not adequately separate people from waste. You can imagine animals and flies getting in there, transmitting all sorts of diseases back to people. So it's a big problem, and it only becomes larger as these systems get more complicated. So to give you the 5-minute version of my dissertation, there are a lot of reasons that people give for these problems. Maybe people can't afford them. Maybe people don't understand why they should have a system. I'm suggesting, at least in some systems, the ones that I've been studying, that's not the case. The problem is an idea called decoupling. So in other words, people are making structural changes without corresponding changes in practice. They make the structural changes in order to be seen as legitimate, rational, reasonable people, much like without sort of related changes in practice that would actually enable them to get the benefits that they say they want. So for example, in an engineering setting, current demographics of this audience notwithstanding, we see perhaps only 20% of students are female. We see 14% of tenure-track professors and tenured professors are female, even though for decades now we've made real structural changes trying to change that practice. So this is something that's really fundamental to organizational theory, which is the background of my work. So that's sort of the very short answer, and I think I included some slides about that. We have 14% women. So similarly, in my dissertation data, you see people feeling very strongly. They're building their own toilets with their own funds. They're saying things like, for example, everyone in this community had a tree toilet or practiced open defecation, right? The bathroom is the tree. I myself broke some of them with the local government people. I provoked others to burn tree toilets. We did it to protect our environment. So very strong emotions. This is not a problem of people not understanding why they should have a toilet, not wanting one. There's something else going on there. So to solve this problem, this idea of decoupling these structures and practice, perhaps improving efficiencies will work. So many of these systems don't actually work. They stink, even though people build them to prevent bad smells. They don't actually separate people from human waste in many situations. If we improve that technical performance, I think we can improve adoptions long term. And then also there's an idea of rational myths. So for example, many people in these communities believed in miasma. So miasma is something that actually is the reason that we built many of the great sewage systems in Paris and London and the world's great cities. We believed that bad smells from rotting organic matter cause sickness. And so this is a reasonable thing, right? If you're using a pit latrine and it smells terrible, you might feel like it's not hygienic. You might feel unclean when you leave. So if people believe that, then we need to have odor management built into all of our latrines. If we don't, they may fail for reasons of social sustainability. That's one idea, and that's what I mean by rational myths. And I'm also interested in knowing if this sort of thing is happening in systems other than just sanitation, different types of infrastructure. For example, in contexts like Colorado, where people are installing renewable energy systems on their homes, do they continue to use them? If not, why would they decide to make a large capital investment for something and not use it? Maybe it's this idea so that they can appear to be rational, to be good citizens, to be modern. Anyway, so that's a bit different, perhaps, than traditional engineering research. But again, it's this idea of making technology work for people. Certainly using educational outreach as part of that, but not trying to change people so that they fit our designs, sort of the other way around, thinking about how we can certainly do educational outreach, but also how we can build things out better. So that is more than enough about me specifically. What I think, at least, imagine that most of you are pretty excited about is this potential for a career in humanitarian engineering. And let me tell you, you're in a really good spot for it by coming here to Mines to be in this program. And I'll talk about why, but just the very brief version is, as an engineer going into this field, you're absolutely sought after. You have very important skills. You are going to have to prove to people that you understand the software side, that you understand the social component. And coming from a program like this will give you that credibility. So it's a great place to start. So the first thing you need to do is to get informed about the field. You're certainly starting that in your program here, and you need to do more of that. I have to tell you, the rest of these slides go against my grain for PowerPoint. I hate slides with lots of words on them. I never write words on them. However, I want this presentation to be a resource for all of you. So I've put more words in than I have perhaps ever done in a presentation, and a lot of web links. So if anyone is interested in getting this presentation, either we can do that after the presentation itself or via email. That's all very doable. So I've put up some links here for some sites that have news about humanitarian things that are going on in the world. This is important, right? Both for knowing where the work will be, assessing your own career potential, matching it to your interests, but also just, again, to show that you're credible, to show that you know what you're talking about, to prove to people that you really understand what you mean when you say you want that career, because there's an awful lot of people who say they want it, and then it turns out that they don't, and that's a problem because it wastes resources. Right, so the first thing you need to do is get informed. I won't click on any of them here, but instead of clicking on those, hopefully the sound will be loud enough for this. I don't have an audio hookup, and I apologize, but I have a 4-minute video that I'm hoping to show you as a, since we're all interested in getting informed, let's learn a little bit.
Do you think we can bring the microphone?
Oh, that's a great idea. Entry-level people. Now, all of those are not for engineers, but some of them are. There are ways into the field. This is just one website on one day, but there is work. And as a tip, stuff that you might be interested in, engineering, is often posted as logistics. So keep an eye out for that sort of a job. I mentioned a difference between aid and development. This is important both for jobs and also for your own personal career growth. Aid, disaster response, being the first ones on the ground potentially or closely thereafter. Development, hopefully a bit more peaceful process long term. So there are some very real differences there in terms of your own lifestyle as a development worker. Now, before I tell you how to get into the field, I might just say it's not for the faint of heart. right? I don't mean this to discourage you, but it is true that working in development as an engineer will mean you are paid less. It will mean you have less job security, especially currently the trend is to push jobs towards people in the countries we're working in, which makes a lot of good sense. Not always, but often. The way to get around that is to be a technical expert, exactly where all of you are, or are positioning yourselves to be. You'll have a less comfortable work environment, right? A lot of the time will be in the field. Although you might also get stuck in an office doing work like fundraising, like management. And in fact, that's a trend for many engineering jobs, development related or not. It's more hazardous, especially the aid work. If you look at statistics on assaults, on murders, on kidnappings, on sexual assault, it happens quite frequently. You're in dangerous transitional places with people who are quite understandably perhaps having mental issues and who are desperate. Right? That breeds problems. So just something to be aware of. Do we try to manage it? Yes. Can we manage all of it? No. So it's a real consideration, perhaps especially for the women in the audience. And you'll also spend a lot more time away from home. So right now, probably for all of you, that sounds fantastic. And travel is certainly really exciting. But also consider 10 or 15 years down the road, if you want to be married, if you want to have kids, there are ways to make it happen, but it's much more complicated. So just something to think about. If you're spending 80% of your time traveling, it's not necessarily a healthy thing for relationships. So something to keep in mind. Again, not insurmountable obstacles, but things to think about really seriously. There are some ways to be involved in development that avoid some of these problems, and I'll talk about those. It's not everyone who wants to be on the front line in the Congo. All right, so this is something that no engineer likes to hear. If you want to work in development, you need to speak more languages than just English. The more the better, at least 2. English counts, but ideally you will at least speak 2 of the UN United Nations languages. Arabic, Mandarin, English, French, Russian, and Spanish. French and Spanish, of course, being the simplest for native English speakers to learn. So if you don't know this language, start learning it. And do this strategically. Think about where you want to end up. You're talking about building technology for people. If you can't talk to people, how on earth do you propose to do that? So that's a tricky thing. Do you have to be absolutely fluent? No. And a lot of organizations will help you improve your language. But you do need to be able to get by. So how do you do that? There's software tools. Rosetta Stone and Pimsleur are some of the standards, reasonably expensive, although Rosetta Stone was the standard for the Army for many years and recently got fired, so they're a lot cheaper than they used to be. They're pretty good software. Of course, you're at a university, so there are courses here that can be expensive. Private lessons, which can also be expensive if you do them locally. If you look especially for Spanish, you can find lessons, via Skype from people around the world, probably for $5 to $7 an hour for one-on-one lessons. It's a pretty good option, and if you Google it, you can come up with some of those. If you have a smartphone, of course, or even a computer, there's a lot of free applications online. Duolingo, Flashcard Deluxe is an app I like for the iPhone. It's just flashcards. It's nothing special about that one in particular, but instead of needing to carry a stack of index cards, it's all on your phone. You always have it. And then, of course, websites like LiveMocha, like Busu, where you can partner with other people who are learning languages. You help them learn English, they help you learn whatever it is. But really, be serious about this. This is something you will need. All right, so you have some language, or at least a plan to get there. You have a college degree or a plan to get there. You're all in this room. That's a great start. So what else do you need? You need some experience. Specifically, if you want to work in development, you need overseas experience. So the Peace Corps is a pretty classic entry point for any US citizen. They do provide airfare, insurance, some language training, a very small stipend, and you also get preferential hiring after the Peace Corps, which is important. Right now, for example, you almost can't get hired into USAID, the United States aid arm, without going through one of their formal entry points. The Peace Corps is one of those. So this is a good place to start and think about. It does require 2 years service overseas. You can go if you are married with a married partner, not with an unmarried partner currently. You cannot take children if that impacts anybody in this room. The application process is very long, and they refuse a lot of people. The acceptance rate is 20 to 30%. But I my personal opinion, and I have not been in the Peace Corps, although I did almost join the Peace Corps, is a lot of that is persistence. It's a long process. If you stick with it, coming from the background all of you do, I think you would find a spot there. It is, as I said, highly competitive, and you don't get a guaranteed location or job. You get to indicate preferences, and they place you. And they may or may not take that into consideration. So that can be difficult. But it is a good way to learn a language. It is a good way to go overseas. It's not a bad place to start for a career in development. It is challenging, though. A lot of Peace Corps volunteers feel that they're sent overseas, and then the projects they're sent to work on don't materialize. The primary point of this program is actually cultural exchange, and it is set up specifically to do that. Not that the projects are secondary, but from the perspective of many of you who want to go out there and build something, you will have to make that happen. It is possible, but just be aware you're going to need a lot of initiative to do that. You can also do a master's degree in combination with the Peace Corps. There are a number of universities that do that now. Michigan Tech University has done that for many years. I believe CU Boulder just started that program, although I'm not entirely sure. There's a number of them, and you can find that on the Peace Corps website. You spend Peace Corps service and time studying as well, so it can be a good option. So here's another way to try out building some skills, to try going overseas. So I should emphasize that often when people go overseas for the first time, they might discover that that's not really for them. They still want to be in humanitarian engineering, but they want to come at it from a different angle. So this is important, right? Career is a big decision. So you should try it out. Water for People is a nonprofit also headquartered here in Denver. They have a great program called the World Water Corps, which will send you overseas for a week to a month, depending on the assignment. You do have to fund yourself or fundraise, so that's a problem with this program. You'll do things like community interviews, mapping, sort of technical, but not building things. They use their in-country staff for that. It's a great start, but it's not enough, right? This is only a few weeks or a month in the field. You need more than that to prove yourself. But it's a great start, and they manage some of the logistics. So it's not a bad way to go, especially if it's your first time overseas. Similarly, you could also try out Engineers Without Borders, which I imagine some of you have done. So again, a week to several months, again, self-funded, although you can do fundraising for it, and directly related to engineering. But again, this is not enough. You'll need to do more than just Engineers Without Borders to really prove your mettle, although it's a great starting point, especially for engineers. You can apply for a Fulbright scholarship. This is support from the US government for international study, research, or teaching English. So you can do some exciting things with that. Actually, Jeff is in the process of pursuing one of those right now for some of his work. This is a highly competitive program. Again, not to discourage anyone in this room, just be aware it is highly competitive, and often there are competitions within your own university before you go on to the main Fulbright competition. So it's a long process, and you need to coordinate it with people. There is a preference for those with little or no international experience. Again, the idea is cultural exchange as well as building knowledge, so that can be a good start for somebody getting started. Different Fulbright awards have different citizenship requirements. There are some for non-US citizens, so if you're not a citizen, it could still be a potential. Rotary also has some scholarships for sending people overseas. They provide about $25,000 for international study or research. That one does require you to be a US citizen, and you would need to be sponsored by your local Rotary Club. So you would need to go and get to know them and get them to sponsor you through that process. And again, all of these are competitive. The Bourne Fellowship is through the State Department. It again provides a good amount of money for international study, research, and training. It also has a year service requirement in the federal government, but that can be in a wide variety of agencies. So for example, you could join the Foreign Service as meeting this service requirement. So again, it could potentially be a good option for people. They do have a focus on national security. You might think there's no way you can talk about your project in terms of national security, but if you're talking about sustainability and resilience of basic infrastructure, of providing water, sanitation, transportation networks, there's a direct link there to national security. This isn't just something that people in the developing world need, right? We need it here too. So that is definitely a possibility. Kiva is a microfinance organization many of you might have heard of. This is not an opportunity for engineering specifically, but it is an opportunity to spend a good chunk of time overseas working in the development industry. Again, self-funded. You do have to be over 21. You do not have to be a US citizen. They do emphasize that perhaps this is not the best first overseas experience. It doesn't mean they won't select you. It is, again, highly competitive. But they do throw you into the trenches with some microfinance organizations, and you work on the ground with people, with organizations, often doing technical support work and logistics work, so moving things, getting them where they need to be. So not a bad option. So another way some people get experience, and one that I've heard many people in the development community advocate, is to just go. Go overseas, make yourself useful, volunteer, find a way to find work. It's tricky. It can be particularly hard if you're really focused on engineering. But again, not impossible. Perhaps the biggest problem with this, of course, is that it requires money. Not all of us have a trust fund behind us to do that sort of work. And I'll talk about ways to get around that for the 99% of all of us. But it is a way that, for example, Ned Breslin, the gentleman who runs Water for People, I mentioned earlier, and it's a really spectacular nonprofit, does advocate that you need to go. You need to get experience one way or the other. So graduate school can be an option. For some of the work opportunities I'll talk about later, you need a graduate degree, some you don't. I've listed some programs here that focus on public health. Not all are in engineering centers. I've also put 2 schools, Stanford and University of Washington in Seattle, that have individual researchers focused on this sort of work. So if any of you are interested in graduate school, you should check out some of these programs. There are some internationally too. Loughborough and Cambridge both have degrees. But again, most of these, so for example, UNC and Cambridge for sure, and I'm not sure about Loughborough, aren't in engineering schools. So that's okay, potentially, but if you do have your heart set on remaining an engineer and working in development, that's something to think about where your degree will actually come from. So another option is to self-fund your grad school. So there are a number of fellowships you can get and apply for directly. The EPA STAR Award, the NSF Graduate Research Fellowship Program will pay for graduate school, master's or ideally a PhD. So with these, you can basically choose where you want to go to school and within reason, choose the research that you'll do. So that's fantastic, although a lot harder because you have to define it for yourself. And with these fellowships, you can go almost anywhere. You just have to find a university, a faculty member who would be willing to support your work. But again, if you can put together your own funding through these or other ways, you can make research, at least, and travel in humanitarian engineering happen. All right, so all of that is about gaining experience. And I've talked about some pros and some cons of what we might sort of traditionally think of as a career in humanitarian engineering. But I do want to step through different ways that people have gotten into this. And I'm going to start, there's sort of a spectrum, right? I'm starting with the most on the ground, most hands-on, and moving away from that. Not any less valuable. I don't mean to imply that in the spectrum. Just a way to sort of organize these in your mind. So to begin with that, I'm going to put Jeff on the spot here and talking about one way to get into this field is to found your own NGO. A lot of people will tell you not to do this because there are 10,000 small NGOs. But if you have a great idea, a great technology, or a different way to do something, it might be a terrific option. So I'll hand it over to Jeff to say a few words about that process.
Sweet. Yeah. So I, about 2 years ago, with a colleague of mine, started up a nonprofit, an NGO, that with the mission of providing safe, clean drinking water to people in Nicaragua that lasts forever. And the idea was that the first mile that organizations were typically going included installing a water system, whereby they then checked that community or that area off the list and then moved on. That was the first mile, but then those systems would invariably break. Well, Jessica mentioned that the Millennium Development Goals, there have been a lot of good successes in having the number of people without access to clean water in the world. A lot of those systems, they're actually already finding out, are breaking at a very alarming rate. about 40 to 50% of water projects usually fail between 4 and 6 years. And so I saw that actually in Nicaragua when I was doing work with, you can also work through like little local organizations that particularly work in, other NGOs, you can work for them as well. I went, after graduating with my master's from the University of Colorado and Mortensen Center, to go work in Nicaragua for 4 months, which was hilarious. And it was hilarious. I had just gotten married, we just went into the field, and it was awesome. But it was also pretty bad for our marriage. Not
His
super
marriage
good.
is just fine.
But our marriage is good now, but it was definitely not. But anyway, saw there was a lot of failure there. 90% of water projects had failed between 8 years after being installed in that area that I was working in. So, second mile was not just going, the first mile was installing, the second mile was making sure they lasted forever. And so, to start up an NGO, you have to do a lot of stuff. One of the main things you have to do is get an official organization. So you have to file for 501c3 status as a nonprofit. You can also go as a for-profit. You have to kind of choose your bend. If you want to talk to me about this later, we can talk about it. But before, if you are interested in starting an NGO, you do not necessarily have to be an entrepreneur. And that's what I realized. I am not an entrepreneurial person. The person that I started with is. There's two different kinds of people. There are essential visionaries who are really tenacious and stubborn and they will never quit. That's what it takes to be an entrepreneur. I quit very easily. Those are called carpenters because the carpenters are more realistic. Like they oftentimes are overly realistic and overly pessimistic and cynical. That's me. But if you did want to start an NGO and you don't think that you are a entrepreneur, partner up with somebody who you think is, and then be that cynical person that makes it happen. Because that's what ended up happening. It takes a realistic bend and also a kind of a lofty bend. So I don't really know what else to talk about with this. It started 2 years ago. After about a year of doing it, I became a little bit too realistic and actually convinced myself to leave that nonprofit. But the nonprofit is still going very well. Second Mile Water, if you're interested, they are actually looking for people who are interested, or actually one person, to actually do work in the field doing rural water. And these are rural water projects, specifically gravity-fed water systems. In Nicaragua, in north central Nicaragua called in the Jalapa Valley. If you're interested in learning more about this, come talk to me. I can put you in touch with the guy who stayed, the central visionary, Travis Ramos. But other than that, if you have any more questions about starting this up, it was a very good learning experience for me. I really enjoyed it. You can talk afterwards.
Thanks, that's perfect. So another way to work in development, if you don't feel ready to found your own NGO, is, as Jeff mentioned, to work for a different NGO. So there are a number of small development organizations, and you might be able to get a job with one of them. So I put some of the pros and cons, again, just based on what I've observed in the field. Funding and job security are usually an issue that will usually be part of your job, trying to pay your own salary, trying to fund the projects you're trying to get done. But honestly, that's true of anything. Even if you're in traditional consulting engineering, you're still always trying to get work in the door. It's a big part of what you do as an engineer. You will have the ability to take on a lot of responsibility quickly. If it's a small organization, when something needs to get done, even if you're straight out of school, you're it. So get to work, and that can be a tremendous growth opportunity. It can also be terrifying, but those two things tend to go together. You'll probably make a lower salary than you will in many contexts. You will have more ability to impact the direction of the work, and probably, although not necessarily, it'll be more grassroots, more on the ground, more dealing with people. You could also work with a big NGO or other development organization, UNICEF, World Health Organization, United Nations, Asian Development Bank, African Development Bank. There are a lot of these. They might be a little more stable. They do tend to have either what they call internships or young professional programs. Sometimes those have citizenship requirements, sometimes not. Just depends on the program, but it can be a good entry point. U.S. Foreign Service is another option. Something to be aware of is a lot of their work is in the Middle East, and you don't necessarily get to choose where you want to go. So just something to consider there, but those careers can be very positive. Again, impact on families. Sometimes if you're being sent to a particularly dangerous post, family can't accompany you. Again, maybe not an issue now, potentially an issue later, something to think about. And then there's other agencies like USAID Again, it's difficult to get hired in here right now with hiring freezes in the government. That could be different in 5 years, hard to say, but 2 ways to get in. One through the Peace Corps, another through a AAAS fellow. The best way that many of us can contribute is to get the highest paying job we can and donate a vast majority of it to other people to do the work. So for example, you can go work for Goldman Sachs, earn a couple $100,000 a year, live on $30,000 a year, and make far more of an impact than you ever could working in the field. So I'm quite serious when I present this as an option. All of you are engineers, you're smart people, this is an option, this is a route you can take. And so when I say that when you're thinking about the future and trying to decide where your own career may take you, keep your mind open. There are a lot of ways to work in development. There are a lot of really real things you can do. Now, of course, a lot of people who take this path, they're seduced by wealth and riches, right, and just start spending all their money. So something else to think about. But again, that's not necessarily the case. Maybe your friends and parents will tell you that's what you'll do, but know yourself. If it's not what you'll do, then it's not what you'll do. It's a real option. So how do you get one of these jobs? I'm not going to click on any of these, but I have listed 3 sites here where there are a lot of humanitarian job postings, both volunteer and paid, mostly paid. They're worth checking out. Relief Web, the Ruger's site on trust.org, and DevX. They're also a good source of news. So how do you get to the career? Let's sum it up. You need a university degree. You need to prove you have those software skills. All of you guys are on track to do that right now. You might need a graduate degree, depending on the path you want to take. Work experience as a standard engineer never hurts, although it can make you a little suspect, right, to the development community. Why does an engineer want to do this? Again, you have this proof that you've been interested from the start. You do need overseas work experience. You need to prove that you really know what you're getting into so that people will know you're going to stay the course. You need another language. So basically, you need to decide where you want to go, where you are on hitting all these milestones, what your schedule is for getting there, how much it's going to cost, and how you're going to make it happen. So for those of you who don't have the trust fund, the money behind you, and you might be despairing, I might just suggest that these 3, especially with this work experience, can go together. If you're about to graduate, you don't speak another language, you don't have overseas experience, consider, at least as one option, taking a more traditional job, doing a darn good job at it, saving the money, studying the language, apply for other jobs, look for other opportunities so that a year or 2 down the road, you can do that big chunk overseas and really make that happen. So again, what I'm saying is you're all adults, right? And this is not an easy field to get into, but it's possible. You can do it. If you want it badly enough, you can make it happen. So I guess we're running out of time, but what I would encourage you to do either now or over the next few days is have a think about these various ways to work in development and pick one, at least for right now. You can change your mind. Think about what you need to get there. Language, overseas experience, a degree, where you currently are and how you can get there, and figure out a way to make that happen. And this conversation is certainly one to be had with friends, right? In the pub, over coffee, wherever it might be, because these are big life decisions, and talking to people you know and who are also thinking about them can really give you a lot of real insight. So thank you all so much for coming today. Have any questions? Jeff and I are still here, certainly, and when you do make it into development, really, I would like to hear about it. So send me an email and let me know what you're doing.
Would it be okay for me to get these